At 13 years old, Rowan Ashford had already learned that silence could be louder than any scream. She sat in the back seat of her father's Volvo, watching the evergreen trees of Washington State blur past her window each mile, taking her further from the suburban safety of Bellevue and deeper into something that felt wrong in a way she couldn't name. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, pale and ghost-like, a girl caught between childhood and whatever came next, suspended in a moment that would split her life into before and after. The car smelled like her mother's lavender hand cream, and the faint metallic scent of her father's engineering blueprints, familiar smells that should have been comforting but instead felt like a lie. Everything felt like a lie now. 3 days ago, she had found the calendar. It was tucked inside her father's study, hidden beneath a stack of Boeing technical manuals marked with dates and symbols she didn't understand. But one thing had been clear: her name written in her mother's careful handwriting, and beside it, a date. Today's date. And a single word that had made her blood run cold. Transition. She had wanted to ask what it meant, had stood outside their bedroom door that night, hand raised to knock, listening to the low murmur of her parents' voices on the other side. But something had stopped her. Some instinct deep and primal that whispered if she asked the question, she might not survive the answer. So, she had said nothing. And now, here they were driving east on Highway 2, past the last gas station, past the last place where cell phone signals reached into the vast wilderness of the Cascade Mountains, where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the sun. Her father's hands gripped the steering wheel with a tension that made his knuckles white. Graham Ashford, aerospace engineer, rational man of science, pillar of their community, deacon at their church. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. And her mother, Dr. Eleanor Ashford, oncologist, healer of the sick woman who had devoted her life to saving others. She sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead, her face a mask of something Rowan had never seen before. Not quite grief, not quite fear. Something harder, something that looked like resignation. "Mom," Rowan said quietly. Eleanor didn't turn around. "Mom, where are we going?" The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats too long. "Just a camping trip, sweetheart," her mother finally said, and her voice cracked on the word sweetheart, splintering like glass. "To celebrate your 13th birthday." But Rowan's birthday had been 2 weeks ago. A small party at home, cake from the grocery store. No friends invited, which had seemed strange at the time but made terrible sense now. The trees grew denser. The road narrowed. The sky disappeared behind a canopy of Douglas fir and western hemlock, ancient giants that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more, indifferent to the small human dramas that played out beneath their boughs. They turned onto a dirt road that wasn't on any map. Rowan had checked. She had her phone out until the signal died 15 miles back, tracking their route with the GPS, watching as the blue dot that represented her location moved further and further from civilization, from help, from everything she knew. The car slowed, stopped. The engine died, and in the sudden quiet, Rowan could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Get out for a second," her father said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere very far away. Why? Rowan asked. Just do it. She had always been an obedient child. Straight-A student. Never talked back. Never caused trouble. But something in his tone made every instinct in her body scream to stay in the car, to lock the doors, to demand they turn around. Her mother turned then finally and looked at her daughter. Really looked at her. And in Eleanor's eyes, Rowan saw something that made her understand with perfect clarity that this was goodbye. I love you, her mother whispered, and tears ran down her face in silent streams. I need you to know that. Whatever happens next, I love you more than anything in this world. Mom, you're scaring me. Get out of the car, Rowan. Her hand moved on autopilot, reaching for the door handle, pushing it open. The air outside was cold, much colder than it should have been for early September, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. And something older, something that smelled like endings. She stepped out onto the dirt road, her sneakers crunching on gravel. The forest pressed in on all sides, dense and dark and watching. She could feel it watching. Her father got out, too, walked around to the trunk, opened it, pulled out a backpack, one she had never seen before, old and worn and clearly packed with intention. Dad, what's going on? He wouldn't look at her. Couldn't. Just held out the backpack, arm extended, hand shaking. Take it, he said. I don't understand. Take the goddamn backpack, Rowan. She flinched at the sharpness in his voice. Graham Ashford never swore, never raised his voice. He was controlled, measured, precise in everything he did. But now he looked like a man coming apart at the seams. She took the backpack. It was heavy. Heavier than it should have been. Dad, please tell me what's happening. For a moment, she thought he might. His mouth opened. His eyes finally met hers. And in them she saw anguish so deep it looked like drowning. But before he could speak, her mother was there, getting out of the car, walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. She put a hand on Graham's arm, and whatever he had been about to say died in his throat. This is the path, Eleanor said quietly, and her voice had changed, had taken on the flat, rehearsed quality of someone reciting from a script. The path to purification, the path to cleansing. What we do for love. What we sacrifice for salvation. The words sounded wrong coming from her mother's mouth. Foreign. Like a language Eleanor had learned but didn't truly speak. I don't understand, Rowan said again, and her voice was very small. You will, Eleanor said. In time, you will understand everything. Her mother reached into her pocket, pulled out something small, pressed it into Rowan's hand before Graham could see. Their eyes met, and Eleanor's lips moved, forming words without sound. Survive. Then she turned and walked back to the car. Graham stood frozen for a moment longer, and Rowan saw his throat work as he swallowed, saw his hands clench and unclench, saw him age a decade in the space of a single breath. I'm sorry, he whispered. And then he was gone too, back in the driver's seat, engine starting, tires beginning to roll. Wait, Rowan said. The car moved forward. Wait, faster now, pulling away, leaving her standing alone on the dirt road with a backpack she didn't pack, and questions that had no answers. Wait, she ran, legs pumping, arms flailing, sneakers slipping on loose gravel as she chased after them, after her parents, after her life, after everything she had ever known. "Mom, Dad, please." But the car didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't even hesitate. It disappeared around a bend in the road, and the sound of the engine faded into the distance, growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed completely by the vast indifference of the forest. And then there was nothing. Just silence. Just trees. Just a 13-year-old girl standing alone in the wilderness holding a backpack and a secret her mother had pressed into her palm. Rowan looked down at her hand, opened her fingers. A compass, old brass tarnished with age, but still functional. And on the back, engraved in Eleanor's handwriting, 3 words, "Follow the map." With shaking hands, Rowan opened the backpack. Inside, she found supplies. A water bottle, energy bars, a first aid kit, matches in a waterproof container, a flashlight, a survival knife still in its sheath, and at the very bottom, wrapped in plastic, a topographical map of the Cascade Mountains with a route marked in red pen, and a book wilderness survival guide with certain pages dog-eared and highlighted. Her mother had packed this, carefully, deliberately, had left her clues, breadcrumbs, a trail to follow, had left her to die, or to live. Rowan wasn't sure which would have been more merciful. She stood there on the empty road as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows that reached toward her like grasping hands. The temperature dropped another degree, then another. Night came early in the mountains, and it came cold. The first lesson of survival, according to the book her mother had marked, "Don't panic." But Rowan Ashford was 13 years old, abandoned in the wilderness by the 2 people she had trusted most in the world, and panic felt like the only reasonable response. Her breath came faster, shallower. Her vision started to tunnel. Her legs wanted to give out to drop her to the ground, where she could curl into a ball and pretend this wasn't happening. But she didn't, because somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the shock, beneath the screaming voice in her head that demanded to know why, there was something else. Something harder. Something that had been forged in the hours of silence in that car, watching her parents' faces, reading the truth in their eyes, anger. They had left her here, had driven away without looking back, had sacrificed her to whatever twisted belief system they had pledged themselves to. And if they thought she would simply lie down and die, they were wrong. Rowan shouldered the backpack, adjusted the straps, and pulled out the compass and map. The red line her mother had drawn led east deeper into the wilderness, following what looked like an old logging road until it branched off toward higher ground. The sun was maybe an hour from setting, not enough time to reach wherever the map was leading, but enough time to get off this road to find some kind of shelter to make it through the first night. Day 1, she thought. Just make it through day 1. She started walking. The forest closed in around her, and Rowan Ashford, honor student, astronomy club president, girl who had never spent a night away from home without her parents, stepped into the unknown. The first night was worse than anything she could have imagined. She found a small clearing maybe 2 miles from where her parents had left her, tucked beneath an overhang of rock that provided some protection from the wind. The survival book said to make camp before dark, to gather firewood to create a shelter. She tried. God, she tried. But her hands shook too hard to strike the matches properly. The wood she gathered was too damp to catch. The shelter she attempted to build from branches and pine boughs collapsed twice before she gave up, and simply huddled against the rock face, wrapped in the emergency blanket from the backpack knees pulled to her chest. The darkness in the forest was absolute. Not like darkness at home where streetlights and neighbors' windows push back the night. This was primordial darkness, the kind that had existed before humans brought fire, before civilization, before anything. And the sounds. She had thought the forest would be silent, but it was alive with noise. The rustle of small creatures moving through underbrush, the crack of branches, the distant call of an owl hunting, something larger moving through the trees, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. Every sound made her heart race. Every shadow made her imagine wolves, bears, mountain lions, things with teeth and claws that saw a 13-year-old girl as prey. She rationed one energy bar for dinner, chewing slowly, making it last, though her stomach cramped with hunger. The water bottle was half empty already. Tomorrow she would need to find a stream, would need to figure out how to purify water using the methods described in the survival book. Tomorrow. If there was a tomorrow. She pulled the book out, tried to read by flashlight, but her eyes kept blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Crying wouldn't help. Crying was a waste of water and energy and time. Instead, she forced herself to focus on the marked pages. Her mother had highlighted specific sections: how to find water, how to build a fire, how to identify edible plants, how to avoid hypothermia. And on one page in the margin, Eleanor had written a single line in pencil so faint, Rowan almost missed it. "You are stronger than you know." Was she? Was this something her mother truly believed, or just a platitude, something to assuage guilt for abandoning her only child in the wilderness? Rowan didn't know, couldn't know. All she knew was that she was alone and scared and colder than she had ever been in her life. She must have slept eventually, though she didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she was staring into the darkness, listening to the forest breathe. The next, pale gray light was filtering through the trees, and her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. Day 2. She ate another energy bar, drank a third of the remaining water, studied the map tracing the red line her mother had drawn with one finger. It led east for another 5 miles, then north along what looked like an old game trail. The elevation increased gradually, climbing into the foothills, and at the end of the line, her mother had drawn a small X. What was there, Rowan didn't know, but it was the only direction she had. She packed up her meager camp, shouldered the backpack, and started walking. The day warmed as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist that clung to the forest floor. Rowan followed the logging road until it began to fade, becoming less road and more suggestion, overgrown with brush and saplings. She found the game trail her mother had marked, narrow but passable, winding between massive Douglas firs that must have been centuries old. Her legs ached. Blisters formed on her heels where her sneakers rubbed. But she kept moving, checking the compass constantly, making sure she stayed on course. Around midday, she heard it. The sound of running water. She followed the sound off the trail, pushing through dense undergrowth until she found the source. A small stream, maybe 3 feet wide, flowing over smooth stones, crystal clear and ice cold. Rowan dropped to her knees beside it, hands shaking as she pulled out the water bottle. The survival book said to purify any water before drinking. But she was so thirsty, so desperately thirsty, and the water looked clean. She filled the bottle, hesitated, looked at the purification tablets in the first aid kit. Do it right, she told herself. Do it the way Mom marked in the book. She added 2 tablets to the water, shook the bottle, waited the prescribed 30 minutes, while her throat burned with thirst. When the time was up, she drank, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She refilled the bottle, purified it again, drank again, filled it one more time for the journey ahead. As she knelt by the stream, something caught her eye. Footprints in the soft mud of the bank. Small footprints. Human footprints. Recent. Rowan's heart stopped. She wasn't alone out here. Someone else had been at this stream, recently enough that the prints hadn't been washed away or filled in by animals. Another hiker. A park ranger, someone who could help. Or something worse. She thought of the calendar in her father's study. Transition. The cult her parents had mentioned. The purification circle. Were there others out here watching, waiting? Rowan stood, quickly backing away from the stream eyes, scanning the forest. Nothing moved. No sound but the water and the wind in the trees. She forced herself to breathe, to think. The prints were small, smaller than her own. Could be a child. Could be someone who needed help as much as she did. Or could be nothing. Could be old prints she was misreading. She marked the location on her map, making note of it, then continued on her way. More cautious now, more aware that she might not be as alone as she thought. Day 2 became day 3. Another night huddled beneath her emergency blanket this time, with a small fire she had finally managed to coax into existence. Another morning of aching muscles and rationed food. But she was still moving, still following the red line, still alive. On day 3, the terrain began to change. The forest grew denser, older. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than her father's car, their branches creating a canopy so thick that the ground beneath was perpetually in shadow. The trail became harder to follow. Sometimes it disappeared entirely, forcing Rowan to rely on the compass and her best guess about where the path might continue. She climbed over fallen logs, pushed through thorny brush that tore at her clothes, and skin waded through marshes that soaked her shoes and made her feet feel like blocks of ice. But she kept going, because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering the look on her mother's face as the car pulled away. Meant trying to understand why parents who claimed to love her would do this. Meant confronting the possibility that she might die out here alone. And forgotten another statistic in the long list of missing persons who vanished into the wilderness. So she didn't stop, didn't think. Just put one foot in front of the other and trusted that the X on the map meant something. Late on day 4, as the sun began its descent and Rowan was starting to look for a place to make camp, she saw it. At first, it registered as wrong, an unnatural shape among the organic chaos of the forest, too angular, too symmetrical, made of metal instead of wood. She pushed through a final wall of undergrowth and stopped, breath catching in her throat. A plain, massive, old, half buried in the earth and overgrown with moss and vines, as if the forest was slowly consuming it, reclaiming it as its own. It was a cargo plane, she realized, the kind used for freight, not passengers. The fuselage was cracked and damaged, one wing torn completely away, the other bent at an unnatural angle. The tail section had separated from the main body and lay 50 feet away, barely visible through the trees. How long had it been here? Years, certainly. Maybe decades. The metal was rusted, the paint weathered away to almost nothing. This wasn't a recent crash. This was history. A tragedy from another time forgotten by everyone except the forest. And this was the X on her mother's map. Rowan approached slowly, cautiously. The cargo door hung open, revealing a dark interior that smelled of rust and decay, and something older. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She pulled out her flashlight, clicked it on, and stepped inside. The interior was larger than she expected, a vast, empty space that had once held cargo. Most of the seats had been removed or had rotted away. The floor was covered in debris, dead leaves, animal droppings, but there were signs of something else too. Footprints in the dust, recent ones. Food wrappers, weathered but not ancient. And near the back of the cargo hold, a section of floor that looked different from the rest. Cleaner. As if someone had been using this space. Rowan's pulse quickened. She moved deeper into the plane flashlight beam, cutting through the shadows, revealing more details. Scratches on the walls. Markings. And there, half hidden beneath a pile of rotten fabric, something that made her blood run cold. A metal panel in the floor, with finger marks in the dust around its edges. This wasn't just an abandoned plane. This was a shelter, a hideout, a home. Someone had been living here, and they might still be here. Rowan turned slowly, flashlight sweeping the darkness, every nerve screaming at her to run, to get out, to leave this place and its secrets behind. But where would she run to? Back into the forest. Back to the cold and the hunger and the endless fear. At least here there was shelter. At least here there were walls. And maybe, just maybe, whoever had made those footprints could help her. She made her decision. Rowan set down her backpack, pulled out the survival knife, and gripped it tightly in one hand while she reached for the metal panel with the other. It moved easily, too easily, as if it had been opened many times before. She lifted it, revealing darkness beneath. And steps. Crude metal steps leading down into some kind of hidden compartment. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. She was about to climb into a dark hole in an abandoned plane in the middle of nowhere, based on nothing but a map her mother had drawn, and her own desperate hope that there was something down there that could save her. But what choice did she have? Rowan took a breath, gripped the knife tighter, and started down the steps. The compartment beneath the plane was larger than she expected. A cargo hold, maybe, or storage that had been converted into something else. Her flashlight beam revealed rough walls, a low ceiling, and evidence of habitation. A makeshift sleeping area with blankets that looked cleaner than they should have been. A collection of supplies organized with military precision. Water containers, food stores, tools, and something else. She turned and her light fell on the far wall. Names. carved into the metal with something sharp. 6 names, each one followed by a date and a single word. Thomas, found. Maria, found. Jacob, gone. Lily, gone. Emma, gone. And at the bottom, fresher than the others, carved with more care. Declan, still here. Rowan stared at the wall, her mind racing. 6 people. 6 children if the names meant what she thought they meant. 4 of them gone. 2 found. What did that mean? Found by whom and gone where? A sound behind her. So soft she almost missed it. The whisper of fabric. The subtle shift of weight. Rowan spun, flashlight swinging, wild knife raised. And there in the shadows at the edge of the light she saw him. A boy. Older than her, maybe 15 or 16. Thin in a way that spoke of hunger, not genetics. Hair long and unkempt, hanging past his shoulders. Clothes layered and mismatched, clearly scavenged and repaired multiple times. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Dark eyes. Watchful eyes. Eyes that had seen too much and learned to trust nothing. They stared at each other for a long moment, both frozen. Both calculating, both trying to decide if the other was friend or threat. Then the boy spoke, and his voice was rough from disuse, but not unkind. You shouldn't be here. Rowan's hand tightened on the knife. I didn't know anyone was here. No one knows. He stepped forward slightly into the light, and she got a better look at him. 16, she decided. Maybe 17. Old enough that the softness of childhood was gone, replaced by something harder. That's why it's safe. Safe from what? He tilted his head, studying her with those dark, knowing eyes. From them. The ones who left you. The words hit like a physical blow. How do you know? Because they left me too. He gestured at the wall, at the names. They left all of us. Rowan's legs felt suddenly weak. She leaned back against the wall knife, lowering slightly. I don't understand. You will. The boy moved closer, and she saw that he was carrying something. A calendar hand-drawn on a piece of cardboard marked with careful tallies. How long have you been out here? 4 days. He nodded slowly. Then you have 26 days left. 26 days until what? The boy looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her stomach twist. Pity. Until they come back, he said quietly. They always come back. On day 30. Every single time. I don't understand what you're talking about. Who's they? What happens on day 30? The boy set down his calendar and moved to the makeshift sleeping area, sinking onto the blankets with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much weight for too long. My name is Declan, he said. Declan Thorne, and I've been in this forest for 547 days, 18 months, watching, waiting, surviving. He looked up at her, and his expression was ancient in his young face. They left me here when I was 14, drove me out into the middle of nowhere, told me to get out of the car, and then they drove away. He paused, just like they did to you. Rowan felt the knife slip from her fingers, clattering to the floor. You're lying. I wish I was. Declan stood moved to the wall with the names, ran his fingers over the carving. Thomas was here when I arrived. He'd been here for 2 months. Taught me how to survive, how to trap, how to purify water, how to stay hidden. His voice went quiet. They came for him on his day 30, drove up in a van, took him away. Took him where? I don't know. I watched from the trees. They were gentle with him, wrapped him in a blanket, put him in the van. He turned back to her. The same thing happened with Maria. Day 30. They came. They took her. But the others, Rowan said, pointing at the names marked gone. What happened to them? Declan's jaw tightened. They didn't make it to day 30. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Rowan felt her knees buckle. She sat down hard on the floor, back against the cold metal wall. "This is insane," she whispered. "This can't be real." I thought the same thing. For the first month, I thought it was some kind of test, that my parents would come back and explain everything, that there was a reason. He laughed, a bitter sound. But there is a reason, just not one that makes sense to people like us. What reason? Declan reached into a hidden compartment, pulled out a folder, old, weathered, full of papers and photographs. "I found this in the plane," he said, "hidden in what used to be the cockpit. Documents, letters, pictures." He opened it, showed her a photograph of people in robes standing in a circle. The purification circle. That's what they call themselves. A cult. Been operating in the Pacific Northwest for over 20 years. Rowan's hands shook as she looked at the photograph. "My parents aren't in a cult." "Are you sure about that?" Declan asked gently. "Because mine said the same thing. Regular family, regular life. Until my 13th birthday came and everything changed." 13, Rowan whispered. All the names on the wall. They were all 13. When they were left, yes. The cult believes in purification through sacrifice. They call it the transition. When a child turns 13, they're brought out here to the wilderness and abandoned, left to survive on their own. He paused. Or not survive. That's murder, not in their eyes. They call it letting nature decide. If the child survives for 30 days, it proves they're strong enough to be purified, to be brought into the circle as a full member. Declan's voice went cold. If they don't survive well, then the sacrifice is complete. The family is cleansed. Their sins are forgiven. Rowan felt bile rise in her throat. "You're telling me my parents brought me out here to die. I'm telling you they brought you out here to be tested. Whether you live or die, either outcome serves their purpose." She stood abruptly, pacing the small space. No, my mother left me supplies. A map. She wanted me to survive. Declan watched her carefully. "Did she?" "She gave me a compass, drew a route, marked pages in a survival book." Rowan pulled out the book, showed him the highlighted sections. Why would she do that if she wanted me dead? For the first time, Declan's expression shifted. Something like hope flickered across his face. "Can I see that?" He took the book, studied the marked pages, the notes in the margin. His fingers traced Eleanor's handwriting with something approaching reverence. "Your mother was trying to save you," he said quietly. Mine did too, in small ways. Left a better jacket than I should have had. Made sure there were matches in my pack. He looked up at her. Some of them don't want to do it, but the cult doesn't give them a choice. There's always a choice. Is there? Declan handed back the book. What do you think they threatened? What do you think they promised these people? They're not monsters, they're believers. And that makes them dangerous in ways monsters could never be. Rowan sank back down, her mind reeling. 4 days ago, she had been a normal girl with a normal life. Now she was in a hidden compartment beneath a crashed plane talking to a boy who had survived alone in the wilderness for 18 months, learning that her parents belonged to a cult that sacrificed children. It was too much, too insane, too impossible to process. I don't believe you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You don't have to believe me, Declan said. You just have to survive 26 more days. If you make it that long, you'll see for yourself. And then what? They take me away, turn me into one of them. Maybe. Or maybe we find another option. He looked at her with those ancient eyes. I've been planning, watching, learning their patterns. And I think there might be a way to stop them. To get out of here. To expose what they're doing. How? Declan moved to another hidden compartment, pulled out something wrapped in plastic. A radio. Old. Battered. But potentially functional. I found this in the plane 3 months ago. Haven't been able to fix it. Don't have the right parts. Don't have the knowledge. He looked at her. But maybe you do. Your mother's map led you here for a reason. Maybe this is it. Rowan looked at the radio, then at Declan, then at the names on the wall. 4 gone. 2 found. And now her. The 7th. She thought about her mother's face in the car. The tears. The whispered, I love you. The compass pressed into her palm with that single word. Survive. Okay, she said quietly. Show me what you have. Show me everything. Declan smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look young again instead of ancient. Welcome to day 5, he said. 25 days to go. And somewhere in the darkness above them in the forest that had swallowed 6 children before and would try to swallow 2 more, the countdown continued. Day 5 of 30. The game had just begun. Day 6 began with Rowan's hands bleeding. She had spent the night trying to weave branches into a better shelter, following instructions from the survival book. But the rough bark had torn her palms open in a dozen places. Small wounds. Nothing serious. But in the wilderness, nothing stayed small for long. Declan noticed immediately when she emerged from the sleeping area, squinting against the morning light that filtered through cracks in the plane's fuselage. Let me see, he said, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had learned that infection killed as surely as hunger or cold. She held out her hands, suddenly self-conscious. They looked pathetic, soft. The hands of a girl who had spent her life in climate-controlled classrooms, not surviving in the wild. Declan examined them without judgment, then moved to his organized supplies and pulled out a small first aid kit, far more extensive than the one her mother had packed. This is gonna sting, he said, and proceeded to clean the wounds with an antiseptic that made her bite her lip to keep from crying out. then bandages wrapped with the efficiency of practice. Out here, you have to take care of injuries immediately. I've seen a small cut turn into blood poisoning in 3 days. Have you seen that, or did Thomas tell you? Declan's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. Thomas told me a lot of things. Most of them kept me alive. He finished wrapping her hands and stepped back. In the morning light, Rowan could see him more clearly than she had the night before. The hollows beneath his cheekbones. The way his clothes hung loose on a frame that should have been filling out, not wasting away. 18 months in the forest had carved him into something lean and hard, all excess burned away. "How did you survive?" she asked. "Really? How did you make it this long?" Declan looked at her for a long moment, weighing something. Then he made a decision. "I'll show you," he said. "But you have to understand something first. Survival isn't one big thing. It's 1,000 small things. Every single day. Every single hour. And if you miss one, just one, it can kill you." "I understand." "No," he said quietly. "You don't. Not yet. But you will." The first lesson was water. Declan led her out of the plain and into the forest, moving with a silence that Rowan couldn't match. Her footsteps seemed to crash through the undergrowth like a marching band while he drifted between trees like smoke. "You're announcing yourself to everything within 100 yards, he said without turning around. "Predators, people, everything. I'm trying to be quiet. Try harder. Step where I step. Feel the ground before you put your weight down. Avoid anything that will snap or rustle." He demonstrated placing his foot with deliberate care on a patch of moss between 2 fallen branches. Like this. Rowan tried to copy him. Failed. Tried again. Failed better. By the time they reached the stream, she had maybe achieved 10% of his silence, but it was 10% more than she'd had before. "This is the water source," Declan said, kneeling beside the same stream where Rowan had seen the footprints days earlier. Those had been his, she realized now. He had been watching her even then, deciding if she was a threat or an opportunity. "I check it every morning. Make sure it's still running clear. Make sure nothing's died upstream and contaminated it." He showed her how to read the water, looking for signs of pollution or disease. How to collect it in containers without stirring up sediment. How to purify it using tablets, and if necessary, by boiling. "The tablets your mother gave you will run out eventually," he said. "Mine did after 6 months. Then you have to boil everything. Every drop. No exceptions." "How do you boil water without a pot?" He smiled grimly. "You learn to make do." The second lesson was food. Declan had a trapline, he explained. 12 snares scattered through the forest in a rough circle around the plain, each one carefully hidden and checked twice daily. "Rabbits, mostly," he said as they walked the line. "Sometimes squirrel. Once I got a grouse, but that was luck more than skill." The first 3 traps were empty. The fourth held a rabbit dead for maybe an hour, still warm. Rowan looked away as Declan reset the snare, her stomach churning. "You're going to have to get used to this," he said, not unkindly. "Out here, squeamishness is a luxury you can't afford." "I know. Do you—" He held up the rabbit. "Because this is dinner. And breakfast tomorrow. and if we're lucky, lunch the day after. This is what keeps us alive. Back at the plane, he showed her how to clean and butcher the animal. Rowan forced herself to watch, to learn, even as her hands shook and her stomach threatened rebellion. The survival book had diagrams, but diagrams didn't prepare you for the reality of blood and viscera, the intimate violence of turning a living thing into meat. "The first time I did this, I threw up," Declan said as he worked with quick, efficient movements. "The second time, too. By the 10th time, it was just something I did, like brushing my teeth used to be." "How many times have you done it now?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. They cooked the rabbit over a small fire, carefully controlled and placed beneath a natural vent in the plane's damaged fuselage to disperse the smoke. Another lesson: fire was life, but fire was also a signal, and signals could bring the wrong kind of attention. The meat was tough and gamey, nothing like the chicken from the grocery store that Rowan's mother used to prepare. But it was protein. It was calories. It was survival. And it was the best thing Rowan had eaten in 6 days. Days 7 through 10 blurred together in a rhythm of lessons and labor. Declan taught her to move through the forest without leaving obvious trails, to recognize edible plants, and more importantly, to recognize the poisonous ones that could kill her. To build a fire in 3 different ways, from matches to friction to flint and steel. He showed her his food cache hidden in a waterproof container buried 30 yards from the plane. Nuts he had gathered in the fall, roots, dried meat wrapped in cloth, a feast by his standard, starvation rations by hers. "This is my insurance," he said. "If something happens to the trapline, if I get injured and can't hunt for a while, this is what keeps me breathing." Rowan absorbed it all with desperate intensity. Every lesson, every trick, every hard-won piece of knowledge that Declan had paid for with 18 months of solitude and fear. And slowly, grudgingly, she began to improve. Her hands learned to tie knots without thinking. Her eyes learned to read the forest, to spot the subtle signs of game trails and water sources. Her body learned to move with something approaching Declan's efficiency, wasting no energy, every movement purposeful. On day 11, she caught her first rabbit. It was pure luck, a young one that had stumbled into a snare she had set under Declan's supervision. But when she checked the trapline that morning and found it there, struggling weakly against the wire, something fierce and primitive surged through her chest. Pride. She had done this. She had taken the knowledge Declan had given her and applied it. And now there was food because of her actions, her skill, her determination. Declan found her standing there, staring at the trapped rabbit with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Good placement," he said. "Right on the game trail, just like I showed you." "I did this," Rowan said softly. "You did. I can survive out here." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe you can." That night, they ate rabbit that Rowan had caught and cleaned herself, and for the first time since her parents had driven away, she felt something other than fear and grief. She felt capable. Day 12 brought the first real conversation. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, the radio between them. Declan had been showing her the internal components, explaining what was broken and what might be salvageable. "You said they took Thomas and Maria," Rowan said, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortable and long. "On day 30. But you're still here." Why didn't they take you? Declan's jaw tightened. I hid. Thomas told me what was coming. Made me promise that when they arrived, I'd stay hidden, stay quiet, no matter what. But if they're your parents, they're not my parents anymore, he said, and his voice carried a finality that closed that door. The people who drove me out here and left me to die. They're strangers who look like my parents. The real ones, the ones I knew, they died the day they joined that cult. Rowan thought about her own mother's face in the car. The tears. The whispered apology. I don't think it's that simple, she said quietly. No. Declan looked at her. Then explain it to me. Explain how love and abandonment can exist in the same action. Explain how they can claim to care about us while leaving us to die of exposure or starvation or worse. I can't explain it, but I saw my mother's face. She didn't want to do it, but she did it anyway. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. That's the part that matters. Not what they wanted, what they did. The words hung between them, brutal in their simplicity. Do you hate them? Rowan asked. Declan was quiet for a long time. I did. For the first few months, hate was all I had. It kept me warm when the fire went out. Kept me moving when my body wanted to quit. He paused. But hate's exhausting. You can't sustain it forever. Eventually it burns out, and you're left with something else. What? Nothing, he said. Just empty space where they used to be. Rowan looked at her bandaged hands, thinking about her own parents. Her father's trembling grip on the steering wheel. Her mother's desperate gift of supplies and hope. I don't want to feel nothing, she said. Then you're stronger than me, Declan replied, because nothing is the only way I survived. Days 13, 14, 15 passed in a blur of survival and small victories. Rowan's trapline produced consistently now. She could start a fire in under 5 minutes. She had memorized the edible plants in a 3-mile radius around the plain. And slowly, carefully, she had been studying the radio. Declan had been right. It was broken. But broken wasn't the same as unfixable. The problem was corrosion. 18 months of moisture and temperature fluctuations had degraded the connections, corroded the battery terminals, damaged the antenna coupling. But the fundamental components were still intact. On the evening of day 15, as they sat in the hidden compartment beneath the plane, Rowan finally spoke the thought that had been growing in her mind. I think I can fix it. Declan looked up from the rabbit skin he was curing. The radio, yes. Rowan, I appreciate the optimism, but I've been looking at that thing for months. It's beyond repair. It's beyond repair with the tools and knowledge you have, she said. But I'm in the astronomy club at school. Was in the astronomy club, she corrected herself. We built a radio telescope last year. I know how these components work. She picked up the radio, began pointing to specific parts. This is just basic corrosion. We can clean it with vinegar from the wild grapes near the stream. The antenna connection is loose, but I can resolder it using copper wire from the plane's electrical system and heat from the fire. The battery terminals need to be scraped clean and rebuilt. Declan set down the rabbit skin, giving her his full attention. And you know how to do all that. I know the theory. I've done similar repairs on our telescope. She met his eyes. I can't promise it'll work, but I can promise I can try. For a long moment, Declan said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay," he said. "But we need to be smart about this. If you're going to fix it, we need to decide when and how to use it. Because once we send a signal, there's no taking it back. I know. And we need to consider the possibility that they're monitoring emergency frequencies, that a signal might bring them instead of rescue." Rowan had thought about this, had spent 3 nights lying awake weighing risks and possibilities. "Day 28, she said. "We send the signal on day 28, 2 days before they're supposed to come. Early enough that actual rescue might reach us first. Late enough that we're close to the deadline anyway." Declan considered this, his expression thoughtful. "It's risky. Everything out here is risky." "True." He looked at her and something like a smile crossed his face. "Okay, Rowan Ashford. Let's fix a radio." Day 16 dawned cold and clear, and with it came the truth Declan had been holding back. They were working on the radio together now, Rowan carefully cleaning corrosion from the circuit boards, while Declan gathered materials from the plane's wreckage. It was delicate work requiring steady hands and patient focus. "There's something I need to tell you," Declan said, suddenly breaking their comfortable silence. "About what happens on day 30. Rowan looked up from her work. "You said they come back. Take the survivors to the compound. That's part of it." He set down the copper wire he'd been stripping and faced her fully. "But it's not the whole truth." The weight in his voice made her stomach clench. "What's the rest?" Thomas explained it to me before they came for him. The cult, the purification circle, they don't see this as murder. They see it as a test, a way for nature to judge whether a child is worthy. Worthy of what? Of purification. Of becoming a full member of the circle. Declan's voice was steady, but his eyes were haunted. "If you die out here, they believe your death cleanses your family's sins. You become a sacrifice. Holy. Your parents are forgiven for whatever transgressions they believe they've committed. And if you survive, then you've proven yourself strong enough to join them. They bring you to the compound, spend months breaking you down and rebuilding you into what they want. Thomas said the survivors become the most devoted members because they've been through the fire and emerged on the other side." Rowan felt cold spread through her chest. "They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to convert us." "Both," Declan said. "Either outcome serves their purpose. Dead children become martyrs. Living children become believers. It's a perfect system. No matter what happens, they win." "What about the ones who are taken?" Rowan asked. "Thomas and Maria. Where are they now?" Declan's expression went dark. "I don't know. But I watched them load Thomas into that van and he wasn't fighting, wasn't scared. He went willingly, almost eagerly, like he'd been waiting for them." He paused. Whatever they did to him in 30 days alone in the forest, it had already started the conversion. The implications settled over Rowan like a shroud. This wasn't just about survival. It was about maintaining her own mind, her own identity in the face of isolation and fear that was designed specifically to break her. "How did you resist?" she asked quietly. "Thomas warned me, told me what to expect. Said the key was to hold on to anger, to refuse to see the abandonment as anything other than what it was. Betrayal." Declan looked at his hands. "So that's what I did." Every day I reminded myself that my parents left me here to die or be brainwashed, that there was no love in that action, no justification. But you said the hate burned out. It did. But by then I'd been alone so long that I'd found other reasons to survive. Spite mostly. The determination to outlast them, to expose what they'd done. He gestured at the radio. This is my revenge, staying alive long enough to destroy them. Rowan thought about her mother's note in the survival book. You are stronger than you know. Was that love speaking or manipulation? A genuine desire for her daughter to survive, or just another layer of the cult's psychological warfare? She didn't know. Couldn't know. All she could do was what Declan had done. Survive. Hold on to herself. And refuse to let them win. Okay, she said, returning to the radio with renewed focus. Then let's make sure we get the chance. Days 17 through 20 became a race against time. Rowan worked on the radio with obsessive focus, taking it apart and rebuilding it piece by piece. Declan helped where he could, but this was her area of expertise, and he knew it. He became her hands, gathering materials she needed while she directed the work. Copper wire stripped from the plane's damaged electrical system. A small container for the vinegar they made from wild grapes, using it to clean away corrosion. Solder fashioned from melted metal and pine resin. A new battery housing constructed from aluminum scavenged from the fuselage. It was painstaking work. Every connection had to be perfect. Every component tested and retested. On day 18, Rowan made a discovery that changed everything. She was tracing the radio's circuit board, trying to understand its original frequency range, when she noticed something. A modification. Someone had deliberately limited the device to only transmit on certain frequencies. This isn't a normal emergency radio, she said, showing Declan. Look at this. These circuits have been deliberately disabled. It can only broadcast on 3 specific frequencies. Declan examined it closely. Why would someone do that? I don't know. Maybe to avoid detection. If you're only broadcasting on unexpected frequencies, it's harder for standard monitoring to pick you up. She traced the disabled circuits with one finger. But if I can rebuild these connections, restore the full frequency range, we could broadcast on standard emergency channels, the ones that Coast Guard and search and rescue actually monitor. Can you do it? Rowan studied the board, her mind racing through possibilities. I think so. It'll take time and I'll need more wire, but yes, I think I can. Then do it, Declan said. Because if we're only broadcasting on frequencies that no one's listening to, this whole plan fails. She worked through the night by firelight and sheer determination. Declan stayed with her, offering light when she needed it. Supplies when she asked, quiet companionship when words would have been a distraction. By dawn of day 19, she had done it. The radio sat between them, rebuilt and modified, ready to transmit on full emergency frequencies. It looked like a Frankenstein's monster of scavenged parts and desperate ingenuity. But when Rowan connected the makeshift battery and powered it on a small LED indicator, flickered to life. It works, she breathed. Declan stared at the glowing light like it was a miracle. Maybe it was. Don't transmit yet, he warned. Not until day 28 like we planned. We need to be ready for whatever happens after. I know. Rowan powered it down carefully, preserving the precious battery life. But we did it, Declan. We actually did it. For the first time since she'd met him, Declan smiled. Really smiled. And for just a moment, Rowan could see the boy he must have been before the forest, before the abandonment, before survival became his only purpose. Yeah, he said. We did. Days 20 through 27 were spent in preparation. They couldn't simply send a signal and wait. If rescue came, they needed to be ready. If the cult came instead, they needed to be ready for that too. Declan showed Rowan his defensive preparations. Crude traps around the plane's perimeter designed to slow down anyone approaching. Hidden paths through the forest that only they knew. Emergency supply caches buried in locations only they could find. If they come and we have to run, he explained, we need to be able to survive on the move. No coming back here. No standing and fighting. We run, we hide, and we wait for actual rescue to arrive. They practiced evacuation routes, timed how fast they could grab essential supplies and disappear into the forest, marked rally points where they could regroup if separated. Rowan had never thought of herself as tactical or strategic. She was a girl who liked telescopes and physics, who solved problems with math and theory, not action and preparation. But the forest had changed her. Survival had changed her. By day 25, she could move through the woods almost as quietly as Declan, could read terrain and weather with an intuition she hadn't known she possessed, could make decisions under pressure that 3 weeks ago would have paralyzed her. The girl who had stepped out of her parents' car was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who had learned that strength wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. On the evening of day 27, they sat together in the hidden compartment, the radio between them, counting down the final hours. Tomorrow morning, Rowan said. 6 a.m. We transmit on all emergency frequencies simultaneously. 3-minute burst. Then we power down and wait. And if nothing happens, Declan asked, we transmit again at noon and again at 6 p.m. We keep transmitting every 6 hours until someone responds. And if the cult responds instead of rescue, Rowan met his eyes. Then we run, and we keep running until the real rescue finds us. Declan nodded slowly. I've been alone for 547 days. Tomorrow might be the day that ends. Or begins, Rowan said. Depending on who's listening. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the forest settled into its nocturnal rhythms. Inside, 2 children who had been left to die, prepared to fight for their lives. Rowan, Declan said eventually, no matter what happens tomorrow, thank you. For what? For reminding me that I'm not the only one. That what happened to me, what's still happening, it's not normal. It's not okay. He looked at the names carved into the wall. For 18 months I've been surviving. But I forgot that surviving and living aren't the same thing. You reminded me of that. Rowan felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. You kept me alive. Taught me everything I needed to know. I would have died without you. Maybe. Or maybe you would have figured it out. You're smarter than I am. Braver, too, in some ways. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Brave isn't the absence of fear, Declan said. It's being terrified and doing it anyway. And tomorrow we're going to be very brave. They slept that night in shifts, one always awake and watching the radio kept safe between them, like a holy artifact. Because that's what it was, really. Their last hope. Their best chance. Their message in a bottle cast into the electronic void. Day 28 arrived with a dawn that was pink and gold beautiful in a way that seemed almost cruel, given what the day might hold. At exactly 6 a.m., Rowan powered on the radio. Her hands shook as she adjusted the frequency, ensuring it would broadcast across all emergency channels. Declan stood beside her tense as a drawn bowstring watching the forest through gaps in the plane's damaged fuselage. She keyed the microphone, spoke clearly calmly the way she'd practiced. This is an emergency distress call. 2 miners 13 and 16 years old stranded in the Cascade Mountains approximately 40 miles east of Stevens Pass. GPS coordinates 47.74 north, 121.12 west. We require immediate rescue. Repeat, this is an emergency distress call. She repeated the message twice more, then powered down to conserve battery. Now we wait, she said. They didn't have to wait long. At 4 p.m. they heard it. The distant thrum of rotor blades cutting through air. A helicopter. Rowan and Declan scrambled out of the compartment, emerging into the fading afternoon light. The sound was growing louder, closer, coming from the west. Could be Coast Guard, Rowan said, hope surging in her chest. Could be search and rescue. But Declan's face had gone pale. It's too fast, too direct, like they already knew exactly where to look. The helicopter came into view, small and black, moving with predatory purpose directly toward their location. And that's when they saw, the second one, larger, orange and white. Coast Guard markings visible even at this distance, approaching from the north. 2 helicopters. 2 very different helicopters. Oh, God, Rowan whispered. They both heard the signal. Declan grabbed her arm. The Colt helicopter will get here first. We have maybe 5 minutes. Maybe less. What do we do? His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the decision already made. We run. We hide. And we pray the Coast Guard finds us before they do. They grabbed their emergency packs and disappeared into the forest, leaving the radio behind, leaving the shelter that had kept them alive, leaving everything except each other, and the desperate hope that rescue would come before capture. Behind them, the black helicopter descended toward the clearing where the plane lay hidden. Ahead of them, the forest waited dark and deep, and offering no promises. And somewhere between predator and savior, Rowan Ashford and Declan Thorne ran for their lives, counting down the final hours of a game they had never asked to play. Day 28 of 30. The endgame had begun. They ran, not the panicked sprint of prey fleeing a predator, but the calculated movement Declan had taught her over 3 weeks of survival. Fast, but controlled. Quiet despite the speed. Following paths, they had marked terrain they knew, using every advantage the forest could give them. Behind them, the black helicopter descended. Rowan could hear it even through the trees, the rotor wash bending branches, the landing skids touching down somewhere near the plane. How far to the rally point? She gasped, her lungs burning. Half a mile, Declan replied, not even breathing hard. 18 months had given him endurance she couldn't match. Can you make it? I don't have a choice. They crashed through undergrowth, splashed across a shallow creek, climbed a ridge thick with Douglas fir. The rally point was a rock formation Declan had discovered months ago, a natural shelter that couldn't be seen from the air and was nearly impossible to approach without making noise. They reached it just as voices echoed through the forest behind them. Male voices. Adult voices. Calling out names that made Rowan's blood run cold. Declan Thorne, your parents are here. It's time to come home. And worse. Rowan Ashford. Your mother is worried about you, sweetheart. Come out and we'll take you home. Declan pressed a finger to his lips. His eyes fierce. They wedged themselves deep into the rock formation, pulling branches and debris over the opening, creating a hide that had worked for him before and would have to work again. The voices grew closer. Footsteps crunching through the forest. At least 3 people, maybe more, spreading out in a search pattern. Rowan's heart hammered so hard, she was certain they could hear it. She focused on breathing slowly, quietly, the way Declan had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't panic. Don't move. Don't make a sound. A man walked past their hiding spot so close Rowan could have reached out and touched his boot. He was middle-aged, fit, wearing outdoor gear that looked expensive. In his hand, a radio crackled. "Sector 3 clear," he said into it. "No sign of the girl. Thornboy probably has her at one of his camps. He's been evading us for over a year. Knows this forest better than we do." The radio crackled back. "Pastor Caldwell says to keep searching. The Coast Guard helicopter is 15 minutes out. We need to find them before official rescue arrives. 15 minutes. That was all the time they had to wait. Just 15 minutes, and the real rescue would be here. But 15 minutes was an eternity when every second stretched like hours. The searcher moved on his footsteps, fading. Rowan and Declan stayed frozen, barely breathing, counting the minutes in heartbeats. 10 minutes passed. Then 12. The voices grew more distant as the search moved away from their position. The cult members growing desperate as their window closed. At 14 minutes, they heard it. A different sound. Louder, more official. The heavy rotors of the Coast Guard helicopter approaching fast. And then, cutting through the forest, sounds a voice amplified by a megaphone. "This is the United States Coast Guard. We have received a distress call from this location. If you can hear this, make your presence known. We are here to help." Rowan looked at Declan. His eyes met hers. A silent question. She nodded. They emerged from their hiding place and ran toward the sound of salvation. Rowan screaming at the top of her lungs. "Here, we're here, help us." The forest erupted with movement. The cult searchers converged on their position from 3 different directions, running now, abandoning stealth for speed. But the Coast Guard crew had heard her. The helicopter banked hard, its spotlight cutting through the trees, finding them. Finding the cult members, pursuing them. "Stay where you are," the megaphone voice commanded. "Coast Guard rescue in progress. All other personnel stand down." The cult members slowed, stopped. Faced with actual authority, actual consequences, they couldn't maintain the fiction anymore. A rescue basket descended from the helicopter, lowered by cable through the tree canopy. A Coast Guard rescue swimmer rode it down, young and professional. and representing everything Rowan had dreamed about for 28 days. "Are you Rowan Ashford and Declan Thorne?" he shouted over the rotor noise. "Yes," Rowan shouted back. "Yes, that's us. Anyone injured?" "No, but those men." She pointed at the cult members frozen in place by the spotlight. "They're not here to help. They're the ones who left us here. They're part of it." The rescue swimmer's expression went from professional concern to something harder. He spoke into his radio rapid fire, calling for law enforcement backup. "Okay," he said, turning back to them. "We're getting you out of here. Now." They secured Rowan first, strapping her into the rescue basket. As she rose toward the helicopter, she looked down at the forest that had been her prison and her forge for 4 weeks. At Declan, still on the ground, watching her ascend with an expression of stunned disbelief. At the cult members standing impotent in the spotlight, their careful system exposed and broken. And at the black helicopter abandoned now, its occupants scattered into the trees. The basket reached the helicopter's door. Strong hands pulled her inside, wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. She was shaking, she realized. Shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "You're safe now," a female crew member said, her voice kind. "You're safe." But Rowan couldn't feel safe. Not yet. Not until the basket descended again. Returned with Declan, his face blank with shock, his body rigid as they secured him and brought the helicopter up and away. As they climbed into the sky, Rowan looked out of the window and saw vehicles arriving below. Police cars. Federal vehicles with FBI markings. The machinery of justice mobilizing in response to 2 children's desperate signal. Declan sat across from her, wrapped in his own thermal blanket, staring at nothing. 18 months he had survived alone. 547 days of isolation and fear and desperate hope. And now it was over. Rowan reached across the gap between them and took his hand. His fingers gripped hers with crushing strength, the only sign that beneath the shock, he was feeling anything at all. "We made it," she said, knowing he probably couldn't hear her over the rotors, but needing to say it anyway. "We actually made it." The helicopter banked west toward civilization, toward medical care, toward answers and justice, and all the complicated aftermath of survival. Behind them, the forest fell away dark and vast and indifferent. Day 28 was ending. Day 1 of everything else was beginning. The hospital was a sensory assault after 4 weeks in the wilderness. Bright lights that hurt Rowan's eyes. The chemical smell of disinfectant. The constant beeping of monitors. The soft voices of nurses and doctors asking questions she struggled to answer through the fog of exhaustion and shock. They separated her from Declan immediately, taking him to another room for his own evaluation. Rowan wanted to protest, to demand they stay together. But her voice wouldn't work properly, and her body was shutting down. All the adrenaline that had kept her moving, suddenly gone. A doctor examined her with gentle efficiency. Dehydration, malnutrition, minor infections from the cuts on her hands. Nothing life-threatening. Nothing that wouldn't heal with time and care and safety. "You're incredibly lucky," the doctor said, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "Another week out there and we'd be having a very different conversation." Lucky. Was that what she was? Rowan supposed it depended on your definition. They gave her fluids through an IV, food, though her stomach couldn't handle much. A bed with clean sheets that felt like luxury beyond measure. And then, finally, sleep. Real sleep. Safe sleep. The first in 28 days. When she woke, it was morning. Day 29. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, warm and gentle, and her mother was sitting in a chair beside her bed. Eleanor Ashford looked like she had aged a decade in 4 weeks. Her hair, usually carefully styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Her hands twisted together in her lap, restless and anxious. When Rowan's eyes opened, Eleanor gasped a sound of relief so profound it was almost painful to hear. "Rowan," she whispered. "Oh, God, Rowan." For a long moment, Rowan said nothing. Just looked at the woman who had given birth to her, raised her, loved her, and left her to die in the wilderness. Why? The word came out rough, damaged by days of minimal use and maximum emotion. Eleanor's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and endless. "Because I was a coward," she said, her voice breaking. "Because I was weak and afraid, and I believed their lies for too long. Because by the time I understood what we had become, what I had allowed to happen, I thought there was no way out. You could have run, could have taken me and left. They would have found us, would have killed us both. The circle doesn't let people leave Rowan. Once you're in for life, or until you're dead." Eleanor leaned forward, her hands reaching toward Rowan, but not quite touching. "But I couldn't let them just kill you. Couldn't let the forest take you without giving you a chance. The map, the supplies, the survival book. I gave you everything I could without them noticing. Everything I knew that might keep you alive." Eleanor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And then I did something else, something more dangerous." "What?" "6 months ago, I contacted the FBI." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "I told them everything I knew about the Purification Circle, the locations, the members, the rituals. But I had no proof, no documentation, nothing they could use to justify a raid." Eleanor finally reached out, took Rowan's hand in both of hers. "So I made a deal. I would help them build a case from the inside. And in exchange, when the time came when you were left in the forest, they would be ready to respond to your distress signal." Rowan felt her understanding of the last 4 weeks shift and reorganize. "You knew I would send a signal. I prayed you would. I gave you everything you needed to survive long enough to try. The map that led to the plane where Declan was hiding. The survival skills to make it through the 30 days. The knowledge that you're smart enough, strong enough to find a way out." Eleanor's grip tightened. "And I prayed that Declan would help you, that you wouldn't be alone." "You knew about Declan." "I knew there had been others, knew that at least one had survived longer than the 30 days was living in that forest, evading the Circle's attempts to find him." Eleanor's voice was steady now, driven by the need to make Rowan understand. "I couldn't tell you. Couldn't give you any information that the Circle might extract if they interrogated you after. But I could lead you to where he was. Could give you the best chance of survival." Rowan processed this, her mind working through the implications. "The FBI was listening for my signal. The moment you broadcast, they knew. Coast Guard was scrambled immediately. and FBI teams moved into position around the known circle locations, waiting for the cult to make their move. Eleanor's eyes were fierce now, no longer just apologetic but proud. You did exactly what I hoped you would. You survived. You adapted. You fought back. And in doing so, you gave us the evidence we needed to destroy them. Dad, Rowan said. Where is he? Eleanor's face hardened. In federal custody, being charged along with 46 other Circle members with child endangerment, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other charges. Did he know about you and the FBI? No. The word was final. Graham is a true believer. He would have stopped me if he'd known. Would have reported me to the Circle, and they would have killed me before I could talk. She paused. I don't know if he can be saved from what he's become, but I know you can. You are my daughter, and you are stronger than any cult, any belief system, any twisted ideology. Rowan lay back against the pillows, exhausted by emotion and revelation. I'm so angry at you, she said quietly. You should be. And I don't know if I can forgive you. I know. Eleanor stood, releasing Rowan's hand. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know the truth. That every moment you were out there, I was fighting for you. In the only way I could. She moved toward the door, then paused. The boy, Declan. He saved you. Didn't he? We saved each other, Rowan said. Eleanor nodded slowly. Good. That's good. Because fighting alone is how they break you. Fighting together is how you win. She left, and Rowan was alone with her thoughts and her anger and the complicated weight of knowing that her mother had both abandoned her and saved her, and that both things could be true at the same time. The next visitor came an hour later. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, 40-something and professional, with a recorder and a notebook and questions that needed answers. Rowan told her everything. The abandonment, the survival, meeting Declan, the names on the wall, the radio repair, the signal, the chase. Agent Chen listened without interruption, making notes, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. The documents you mentioned, she said when Rowan finished. The ones Declan found in the plane about the Circle's history. We'll need to recover those. They're in the hidden compartment beneath the cargo hold. We have teams there now. They've already found 6 sets of personal effects. 6 children who didn't make it out. Agent Chen's voice was gentle but firm. Thanks to you and Declan, we can finally give those families closure. And thanks to your mother's cooperation, we can ensure this never happens again. How many? Rowan asked. How many children were left in that forest? 11 that we know of. Over the past 5 years. 4 died. 2 were retrieved on day 30 and indoctrinated into the Circle. 3 are still missing, possibly living under assumed names. And 2. She looked at Rowan with something like admiration, refused to be victims. What happens now? Now we finish building the case. We've already executed search warrants on the Circle's compound in North Bend and 17 private residences. We've seized documents, computers, financial records. We have your testimony and Declan's. And we have your mother's insider knowledge. Agent Chen closed her notebook. The purification circle is finished. Pastor Jerome Caldwell and his inner circle will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. And my father will face justice. The extent of his involvement is still being determined. But at minimum, he'll serve significant time for child endangerment and conspiracy. She paused. I'm sorry. I know that's not easy to hear. It wasn't. But it was true. And Rowan had learned in the forest that survival sometimes meant accepting hard truths and moving forward anyway. 6 months later, United States District Court for the Western District of Washington convened for the trial that had captured national attention. Rowan sat in the witness box, 14 years old, now no longer the girl who had stepped out of her parents' car, but not quite yet who she would become. She wore a dress her mother had bought her clothes that fit her. Changed body, her stronger frame. The courtroom was packed. Media in the designated section, families of the other victims, and seated in the defendants section, 47 members of the Purification Circle, including Pastor Jerome Caldwell and Graham Ashford. Rowan's father wouldn't look at her, hadn't looked at her once during the entire trial, as if by not seeing her, he could deny what he had done. But Pastor Caldwell stared at her with eyes that burned with unshakable conviction. Even now, even facing life in prison, he believed. And that Rowan realized was the most terrifying thing of all. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Margaret Torres, stood before her. Miss Ashford, can you tell the court what happened on September 15th of last year? Rowan took a breath and began to speak. She told them everything, not with tears or drama, but with the calm clarity of someone who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. She described the car ride, the abandonment, the terror of that first night. She told them about finding the plane, about Declan, about learning that she wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. She told them about the names on the wall. Thomas, Maria, Jacob, Lily, Emma. Children whose only crime was turning 13. And she told them about the choice she had made. Not to give up, not to give in, but to fight back with intelligence and determination and the refusal to let them win. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Thank you, Miss Ashford, Prosecutor Torres said quietly. No further questions. The defense attorney stood an expensive suit and calculated sympathy. Miss Ashford, isn't it true that your parents provided you with survival supplies? Yes. A map, a compass, food and water, medical supplies. Yes. So they weren't actually trying to kill you, were they? They were giving you tools to survive. Rowan looked at the attorney, then at her father, then back. If you put a child in the middle of the ocean with a life raft and some supplies, you're still trying to drown them, she said. You're just letting the water do it for you. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. The defense attorney sat down his strategy in ruins. Declan testified next. Older, now almost 18, starting to fill out with regular meals and safety. He spoke with the same calm authority he had shown in the forest, describing his 18 months of survival in detail that made several jury members wipe their eyes. When asked why he had helped Rowan, his answer was simple: because no one should face that alone. Because the only way to beat them was to prove they were wrong. That we weren't just sacrifices or converts. That we were people. And people help each other. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Pastor Jerome Caldwell received life without parole. His inner circle, including the men who had chased Rowan and Declan through the forest, received sentences ranging from 30 to 45 years. Graham Ashford, after testimony from Eleanor about his role and his genuine belief in the circle's mission, received 18 years. The judge acknowledged his cooperation, but noted that belief did not absolve responsibility. When the sentencing was read, Graham finally looked at Rowan, and in his eyes she saw not remorse, but confusion. Even now he didn't understand what he had done wrong. Eleanor testified for the prosecution, detailing the circle's operations with clinical precision. Her immunity deal held. No charges. But the price was written on her face in the gray hair that had appeared seemingly overnight, in the way she held herself as if expecting a blow. After the sentencing in the courthouse hallway, Rowan found her mother standing alone. "It's over," Eleanor said. "Is it?" Rowan asked. "Does it ever really end?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, at the young woman she was becoming, forged in fire and survived through will. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we can try to build something new, if you'll let me." Rowan thought about the 28 days in the forest, about Declan's lesson that hate eventually burned out, leaving only empty space. But empty space could be filled with something else, something better. "Okay," she said. "We can try." Eleanor's face crumpled with relief, and for the first time in months, Rowan let her mother hug her. Let herself be held. Let herself, just for a moment, be a daughter instead of a survivor. Across the hall, Declan stood with his own family. His parents, who had fled the circle a year before Declan's abandonment and had spent 18 months desperately searching for their son. His little sister, who barely remembered him but hugged him anyway. He caught Rowan's eye and nodded. A silent acknowledgement of shared experience, shared survival, shared victory. They had made it, both of them, together. 3 years later, Washington, D.C. in spring. The National Child Safety Conference drew attendees from across the country. Child welfare advocates, law enforcement policymakers, survivors. The Marriott Conference Center was packed. Hundreds of people gathered to discuss how to protect the most vulnerable. And on the main stage, about to deliver the keynote address, stood Rowan Ashford. 16 years old now, taller, stronger. Hair shorter than she used to wear it. Eyes that had seen darkness but chose to look toward light. In the front row sat Eleanor, watching her daughter with pride and pain mixing in equal measure. And beside her, Declan Thorne, 19 now, studying aerospace engineering at University of Washington, taking a day off to support the girl who had become his sister in every way that mattered. Rowan stepped to the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and began to speak. "My name is Rowan Ashford. 3 years ago, when I was 13 years old, my parents drove me into the Cascade Mountains and left me to die." The room went silent. They did this because they belonged to a cult called the Purification Circle. They believed that abandoning their child in the wilderness was an act of love, a test, a path to salvation. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. They were wrong. What happened to me, what happened to Declan Thorne and to 11 other children wasn't love. It wasn't a test. It was abuse. It was attempted murder dressed up in religious language and justified by twisted belief. But here's what I learned in those 28 days in the forest. Strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and choosing to act anyway. Courage isn't the absence of vulnerability. It's being vulnerable and refusing to let that vulnerability define you. I survived because I chose to survive, because I learned skills and made plans and refused to give up. But I also survived because I wasn't alone. Because Declan, who had every reason to hide and protect only himself, chose to help me, to teach me, to remind me that even in the darkest places, human connection can be a lifeline. Her voice strengthened, carrying to the back of the room. The purification circle is destroyed. 47 members are in prison. But cults like this still exist. Children are still being abused in the name of belief. Still being told that suffering is holy. Still being abandoned in forests and in plain sight by people who claim to love them. So I'm here to say this. To any child being hurt in the name of religion or ideology or family tradition, you are not alone. What is happening to you is not your fault. And there are people who will help if you can find the courage to ask. And to any adult who sees something wrong, something that makes your instincts scream that a child is in danger, trust that instinct. Report it. Investigate it. Don't look away because it's uncomfortable or because you don't want to get involved. Because 3 years ago, my mother made a choice. After years of being complicit, after participating in a system that hurt children, she chose to fight back. She contacted the FBI. She helped build a case from the inside. She gave me tools to survive. And then she brought the cavalry. Rowan looked directly at Eleanor, who was crying silently in her seat. Was it enough to erase what she did? No. Will I ever fully trust her the way I did before? Probably not. But she made a choice when it mattered most to prioritize my life over her fear. And that choice saved me. She turned back to the audience. So make that choice. Every day, choose children over comfort. Choose action over complicity. Choose to be the person who stands between a child and harm, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. 3 years ago, I learned that I could survive in the wilderness with nothing but my wits and will. But the greater lesson was this. We survive better together. We heal better together. We build a safer world together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for choosing every day to be part of the solution. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People stood, wiped their eyes. Some openly wept. Rowan stepped back from the microphone and walked off the stage where Declan was waiting. "Good speech," he said. "You wrote half of it," she replied. "Maybe, but you lived all of it." He smiled, ready for the next part. What next part? The memorial. We're planting the trees today, remember? She had almost forgotten. Or maybe she had been trying not to think about it. They drove north from D.C., Eleanor at the wheel. Declan in the passenger seat. Rowan in the back, watching the landscape change from city to suburb to rural farmland. 4 hours later, they arrived at a small park in rural Virginia, not far from where one of the circle's victims, Jacob, had lived before his disappearance. His parents were there, and Maria's grandmother, and Lily's aunt, and Thomas's younger brother, grown now in his 20s. The families of the children who hadn't made it home. They gathered around 6 young trees already planted in a circle, a memorial, a living reminder. Rowan moved to stand before the 2 smallest trees planted that morning. "Jacob," she said, quietly reading the small plaque. "Age 13, gone but never forgotten. Lily, age 13, her light endures." She knelt, placed her hand on the earth around Lily's tree. Thought about a girl she had never met, whose name carved in metal had been her first proof that this nightmare was real. "I'm sorry I never knew you," she whispered, "but I promise you mattered. Your life mattered. And because of you, because of what happened to you, we stopped them. You helped save everyone who came after." Eleanor stood beside her, silent. Declan on the other side. The families formed a circle around the trees. This strange congregation of survivors and mourners bound together by tragedy but choosing to remember with hope. Thomas's brother spoke first. "My brother was brave, scared but brave. And I hope wherever he is now he knows that his story helped end this, that he wasn't forgotten." Others spoke. Maria's grandmother, Jacob's mother, her voice shaking. Lily's aunt reading a poem the girl had written in 5th grade about wanting to be an astronaut. When it was Rowan's turn, she stood and faced the circle. "I didn't know any of them, but I lived in the shadow of what happened to them, saw their names, walked the same forest, felt the same fear." She took a breath. They deserve better. They deserve to grow up and have futures and make mistakes and fall in love and become who they were meant to be. They didn't get that, but the rest of us did. And the only way to honor them is to live fully, to refuse to let fear win, to build the kind of world where what happened to them can never happen again. She looked at Eleanor. "That means holding people accountable even when we love them, especially when we love them." She looked at Declan. "It means helping each other even when it's hard, even when we're scared." She looked at the trees, young and fragile but growing strong. "And it means remembering. Always." The sun was setting as they finished painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The families dispersed slowly, some staying to sit with the trees, others walking back to their cars, with the weight of grief made slightly lighter by acknowledgement. Rowan, Eleanor, and Declan were the last to leave. "Mom," Rowan said as they reached the car, "have I forgiven you?" Eleanor went still. "I don't know. Have you?" Rowan thought about 3 years, about therapy sessions and hard conversations and slowly rebuilt trust, about watching her mother testify, watching her face consequences, watching her work every day to be worthy of a second chance. "Not completely," Rowan said honestly. "I don't know if I ever will completely. What you did was too big. The betrayal was too deep." Eleanor nodded, pain evident in her eyes. "But," Rowan continued, "you gave me life twice. Once when you bore me. Once when you gave me the tools to survive and the pathway to rescue. And I think that has to count for something." "What does it count for?" Eleanor asked quietly. Rowan stepped forward and took her mother's hand. "It counts for this. For trying. for building something new on the wreckage of what was, for being my mother again, even though the relationship can never be what it was. Eleanor's face crumpled. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. But it's what I'm choosing to give. They stood there in the parking lot, mother and daughter bound by blood and trauma and the difficult work of redemption. Declan cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but if we don't leave soon, we'll hit rush hour traffic. The moment broke. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Rowan squeezed her mother's hand once more, then released it. They got in the car and started the long drive back to Washington State, where a new life waited. Where Rowan would finish high school and apply to colleges and eventually study astrophysics because the stars had guided her through the darkest night, and she wanted to understand them better. Where Eleanor would continue her work with survivor advocacy groups using her insider knowledge of how cults operated to help deprogram members and prevent recruitment. Where Declan would build rockets and dream of space, channeling his survival skills into engineering problems, his 18 months alone becoming the foundation for a career in systems that kept people alive in hostile environments. As they drove, Rowan pulled out her phone and opened the app for Rowan's Light, the nonprofit she had founded a year ago. Already they had helped 12 families escape high-control groups. Already they had saved 3 children from situations that might have ended in tragedy. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was something. The forest was behind them now, both literally and metaphorically. The plain where 2 children had hidden and survived would eventually become an official memorial site, preserved as a reminder of what had happened and what had been overcome. The names carved in metal would remain: Thomas, Maria, Jacob, Lily, Emma, Declan, and now carved below them by Rowan's own hand during a private visit last month. 2 more names: Rowan, survived; Eleanor, chose differently, because that was the truth in the end. Everyone had choices, even when the choices were terrible, even when the consequences were devastating. Her parents had chosen the cult over their daughter. Her mother had chosen eventually to fight back. Declan had chosen to help instead of hide. And Rowan had chosen 28 times over 28 days to wake up and keep fighting. Those choices had consequences. Justice and redemption, and healing and scars that would never fully fade. But they also had power. The power to change everything. As the car carried them through the deepening twilight, Rowan closed her eyes and thought about the girl she had been 3 years ago. 13 years old. Terrified. Abandoned. That girl was gone. Had died in the forest and been reborn as something harder, something stronger, something that understood both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human courage. She missed that girl sometimes. Missed her innocence, her unquestioned trust, her simple belief that parents always protected their children. But she wouldn't go back, couldn't go back, because the person she had become forged in fear and survival, and the refusal to surrender that person had the strength to help others, to speak truth, to stand in front of hundreds of people and say, "This happened, this was wrong, and we can do better." The forest had tried to kill her. Instead, it had made her unbreakable. And in the end, that made all the difference. Rowan Ashford was 16 years old. She had survived 28 days in the wilderness. She had exposed a cult. She had saved lives. And she was just getting started.